Good afternoon, dear colleagues and dear guests. Today, March 23rd, we are very happy to welcome you to next episode on happiness research. And today we have special guests from Germany. And we usually start our seminars or lectures from the addressing words from Ms. Nu, who is a director of Emirates Center for Happiness Research here, but unfortunately she cannot be with us right now because she's at this moment giving a lecture to other people in university. It was a clash of commitments, but she sent us a video message and we would be happy to play it. So let me share the screen and play the video. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nofel Junebi. I'm the director of Emirates Research Center for Happiness, and I welcome you all through our new episode, Happiness Research Talk. Through these talks, we are trying to raise the awareness of well-being by inviting the researchers who have done a lot of work understanding more the science of well-being, its implications. And also through these talks, we're trying to help the policymakers benefiting from this science. And today, we are delighted to have two speakers from Germany, Jan Delhey and Leonie Steckermeier, who will be talking about Does Inequality Hurt? I'm very sorry not to be live with you today, but I'm sure everyone will benefit from today's talk. Enjoy, everyone.
So that was the video recorded introduction from our director of Emirates Center for Happiness Research, Ms. Nov. And please accept sincere apologies that she cannot be present live here today. It's just an exception. And I'm very happy to give the floor now to our speakers. Usually we have about 40 minutes for the talk and then about 20 minutes for the questions and discussion. So please make sure that we have that time because usually we have a lot of questions from the guests. And so far we have about 30 participants. So please, the floor is yours and you can share the screen and start the presentation. Jan and Leonie, the floor is yours.
Okay, can you see the screen with the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Yeah, Tatiana, thank you very much for inviting us for this talk. We both have never been in the Arab world, so it would have also been nice to give this talk in presence. This would be quite an adventure, but I think the Zoom meeting also is a nice functional equivalent, at least for talking about happiness and what inequality has to do with subjective well-being. This is a topic which is, of course, of great interest if you approach subjective well-being from a sociological point of view, because inequality is one of the, as we all know, one of the main topics of sociology. And we are especially in this talk focus on one aspect of subjective well-being, and this is status anxiety or inferiority feelings, so the lack of social appreciation from others, the lack of social respect. And how this is generated probably by inequality or by other social forces. This is also a very nice topic because it nicely combines general sociology with the topic of subjective well-being, because many sociological classics have thought about the need of human beings for being respected by others. Think of Veblen in his book about conspicuous consumption, where this motive is a strong motivation for human beings to buy things, for example, or to have a certain lifestyle. It's also important in Pierre Bourdieu's work with his focus on symbolic capital, or in David Riesman's work on the lonely crowd. So it's a important topic in sociology. On the other hand, it's not that often approached empirically, and that's what we did. We used a little bit a different theory for anchoring our entire research, and what we focus on or use as a point of departure for our research project, which have been funded by the German Science Foundation and which occupied us for almost 4 years, is a famous inequality hypothesis, as popularized by Wilkinson and Pickett in their famous book, The Spirit Level Theory. So in this theory, status anxiety, feelings of inferiority play a huge role. So what is the theory about? The theory is concerned about the amount of social ills in modern rich countries. So they look at a range of health problems, of social problems, and their observation is that the Western countries are affected very differently by these health and social problems, and their explanation they put forward why this is so is the level of income inequality. So their idea is that it's one single cause. So the greater the scale of income inequality in a country, the more is the population affected by various health and social ills. And why is this the case? Why does income inequality has this corrosive effect on individuals, but also on society at large? According to Wilkinson and Pickett, it's a socio-psychological phenomenon they call status anxiety. So in unequal societies, their theory goes, people feel more anxious about their status, and this then translates into behavior with which they harm themselves and also others. So that's the theory in a nutshell, and our research projects aimed at testing this theory and looking particular on the path from income inequality to status anxiety, because this is one part of the theory on which in the Spirit Level book not much evidence was provided. In fact, no evidence. The evidence concerned mainly the direct path here from income inequality to social ills. In our project, nevertheless, we looked also at this upper path, and we collected for a larger number of countries than Wilkinson and Pickett, for 40 countries, information on various social ills. We focused on 6 social ills here, and we collected these data for the year, from the year 2000 on a yearly basis, so that our database is much bigger than Wilkinson and Pickett's. And what we do find is in this part of our research that basically the main claim of the Spirit Level theory is true. We also do find a strong aggregate link between the extent of income inequality and the amount of social ills. We see this in every year. This scatter plot gives you an impression. So on the x-axis, you have the income inequality as measured by the Gini index here from 2013. And on the y-axis, you see the amount of social ills, an index of 6 health and social problems. And you clearly see that the regression line is upwardly directed. So that means in countries with a higher income inequality, you also have more social problems, whereas here on the more egalitarian countries, the Nordic countries in particular, but also Czech Republic, Belgium, here the level of social ills is much smaller. So that part of the story of Wilkinson and Pickett is corroborated. By the way, here comes our first request to you. So when collecting all the countries and the data, we had to exclude a number of countries from the Arab Peninsula, for example, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, mainly because we could not unearth data on income inequality for these countries. So if you could help us identifying data on the income distribution for these countries, we will be happy to learn about this, because then we can also extend our database and also include the Arab countries into this comparison of rich countries. So this is one part of our, or was one part of our project. But as I said, for the most part, we focused on the link from inequality to status anxiety. So what are inferiority feelings? What is status anxiety? So we defined inferiority feelings very much in line of how Wilkinson and Pickett defined it, as a subjective impression of not counting much in the eyes of others. So as I said at the beginning, it has to do with a lack of social appreciation we feel, and a lack of social respect we receive from others. We are using mainly European data for this project, the European Quality of Life Survey, where we have 2 items tapping this concept of inferiority feelings. And on this slide, you see the 2 items we utilized, and these items give an immediate impression what we mean by this concept of inferiority feelings. So the items read as: I don't feel the value of what I do is recognized by others, and some people look down on me because of my job situation or income. And both items have been measured on a 4-point scale from, no, a 5-point scale, from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And we put them together into one composite index. These inferiority feelings, where can we locate them in the toolbox of the well-being concept? So it can be seen as part of what Caius regards as social well-being, because it has to do how we relate to other people. And it is very obvious that the social well-being then should also have something to do with our overall happiness and life satisfaction. When we talk about inferiority feelings, then of course we talk about an deteriorating effect, and that's exactly what we could establish in a paper which has been published in 2016 already. So this was actually the first paper we did together. So it's clear then from this research across all European countries that inferiority feelings decrease our overall subjective well-being. So happiness and life satisfaction were here our 2 dependent variables, measured each on a 0 to 10 scale. And when we move from a complete absence of inferiority feelings to a complete presence of inferiority feelings. This decreases then the happiness of Europeans by almost 1 scale point. It's minus 0.8, and it decreases life satisfaction by a little bit more than 1 scale point. 1.2 was here the coefficient. So clearly a negative relationship between inferiority feelings and general well-being of the people. And this effect also holds when we control for a number of socio-demographic factors, which you can see here on the slide. But also if we include some other what can be called basic goods, so more complex determinants like health, economic security, self-development, leisure, or friendship. So this tells us again that this complex of state of society, or if you want to put it in positive terms, social respect or appreciation, is really an important issue for human beings, like as sociologists would expect. Now on this slide, you can see the distribution of inferiority feelings across the European countries. So these are data from 2016. This is the most recent EQLS which is available. The scale is from 0 to 4. You see here the country averages, the bar chart on the left-hand side, and then also the map. First of all, good news is that these inferiority feelings are not super widespread. So you see the largest average, the highest average is in Albania with below 2 on the 0 to 4 scale. The lowest values we have for Sweden, 0.6 or 0.7. So that means it's not super widespread, these feelings of inferiority, which is of course a good thing, but also fits to the notion of Europe as a continent with a rather high level of subjective well-being. We see nevertheless a huge variation. So the Nordic countries, Finland, Denmark, Austria, Sweden, are those with the lowest level of inferiority feelings. These are the more rosy spots here on the map, and on the other side of the ranking, the dark red dots on the map, like Albania, North Macedonia, then Turkey or Bulgaria. There we have much higher levels of inferiority feelings. So our question now is, of course, where does this come from? And our idea was that in order to do research which is well connected to theories, we need a multi-level approach. And this is what we try to picture here with this schema. So you see basically 2 levels, a micro level here and a macro level. I will walk you through these 2 levels in the next minute. So first of all, this inferiority feelings are, of course, a feeling of individuals. So we are here at the individual level, but it's not something we simply receive from others, but it's an impression that we get how others feel about us. Right? So it's a kind of my feeling about the social worth, which is attributed to us by others. Now, where does this feeling come from? On the micro level, of course, it stems from our virtual or real interactions with other people. So it's a relationship between ego and alter. And we do see that there are 2 channels. So from interactions So we could be criticized by other people, then we feel downgraded, and this increases then our level of inferiority. Or there could also be another channel, social comparisons. We compare ourselves to our neighbor. The neighbor has a new car, a bigger car, and we feel inferior. So these are the two channels at the micro level. We cannot distinguish between them in our own research, but we nevertheless found it important to highlight this. Then, of course, individuals and also the relationship between individuals is embedded into larger social structure. That's why the macro level and the societal characteristics come into play. And we think in this model that the way how people interact with each other and how often they engage in social comparison is kind of shaped by what we call a collective style of relationships, which differs from society to society. So this collective style of relationship can be rather egalitarian and cooperative, which would then be a good thing from a well-being perspective, and in particular from the perspective of inferiority feelings. But it can also be inegalitarian and very competitive, the style of relationship. And this is exactly the style we assume that this leads people into social comparisons, which then increase the inferiority feelings, but also colors the social interactions, makes them, if they are competitive, then they are more unpleasant, for example, which also may raise inferiority feelings. So it's a going together of these two levels, the micro level and the macro level. Of course, the question now is, where does this collective style of relationship comes from? And Wilkin and Pickett's answer, of course, here is it's a level of income inequality. It's a reasonable choice, and we will also look at this empirically. But we also have other ideas about which societal characteristics might influence how this collective style of relationship looks, and how it influences then inferiority feelings among different populations. And this is exactly the point where I will hand over to Leonie, who will give you more information about these ideas, about the societal characteristics, and will then guide you through our key empirical results.
Thank you. As Jan has explained, we do our research in a multi-level way. So we always look at the individual level, but also at the societal level. So everything I show you beyond this point will be multi-level models, and we mostly use data from the European Quality of Life surveys. We use data from 2007, 2011, and the newest wave, 2016. And later on macro level, we will make use of various other data sources from the World Bank, the World Inequality database from Frederick Salt for GDP and Gini. And we calculate or estimate some measures from the European Value Study, but also from Eurobarometer Wave. Our research is mainly driven by two sets of questions, one on micro level for individuals and one on macro level for societies or countries. On individual level, first of all, we want to know which horizontal parameters such as gender or age, but also which vertical parameters like income or education structure inferiority feelings, so which heighten or which dampen inferiority feelings on individual level. And on societal level, first and foremost, of course, we want to know whether Wilkinson and Pickett are right and whether income inequality really is the major driver of inferiority feelings, and excuse me, whether GDP, whether national wealth really has done its job in protecting people from feeling inferior. And then we go beyond the scope of the spirit level theory and look at cultural values and cultural inequalities, which might also dampen or increase how strongly people experience inferiority feelings in different societies. Let's take a look at the individual level. Come on. Okay. For the horizontal parameters, we find that being a citizen of your country, living with a partner, and having children is good for, or dampens inferiority feelings, is good for your well-being. For age, we find a U-shaped effect indicating that it is the younger and the elderly who experience less inferiority feelings than those in the middle-aged groups. And we can find a similar pattern within the employment status. Actively participating in the labor force is one of the key indicators for how strongly people experience inferiority in their lives. Compared to those who are employed, who of course experience low levels of inferiority, those who are legitimately out of the labor force, again, the young and the elderly, namely the students and the retirees, experience equal or less inferiority feelings than those employed. On the contrary, those who are illegitimately out of the labor force, namely the unemployed and those who are unable to work for health reasons or other reasons, experience much higher levels of inferiority feelings. In a similar pattern, with higher education and higher income, inferiority feelings decrease. And on top of that, if you own your house or your apartment, then you also experience lower feelings of inferiority. Let's move on to the societal level. First of all, as you can see, we do find the assumption of Wilkinson and Pickett that income inequality increases inferiority feelings. We find a positive and significant relationship. However, in multivariate models, we can only find this effect once, and it turns insignificant once we control for GDP and other cultural measures. On top of that, we do find, contrary to the assumption of Wilkinson and Pickett, a negative significant relationship between GDP and the inferiority feelings, so that in richer societies, people actually experience less inferiority feelings. However, again, we can only find this effect in multivariate modeling once, and it turns insignificant once we control for cultural inequality. From these rather unsatisfactory results, we then moved on beyond the scope of the spirit level and looked at cultural factors on societal level, namely, first at cultural inequality. As there is no ready-made measure for cultural inequality, we had to invent one ourselves, and we called it the Cultural Class Division Index. The general idea is borrowed from Pierre Bourdieu. We use Eurobarometer data from a special Eurobarometer data set from 2007, which asked people about their cultural consumption, which comes in very handy for our measure of cultural class divisions, in short CCD, which measures the extent to which individuals' cultural consumption is structured by their economic and cultural capital. Simply put, the CCD measures to what extent your education and your income determines whether you go to the opera or to a soccer match. How do we do that? First of all, we construct 4 types of cultural consumers. We have the highbrow cultural consumers. Those are people who only go to the opera, to the museum, to the theater, to the ballet. And we have the lowbrow cultural consumers, which is a group which only consumes pop culture. So they go to the cinema, they go to a soccer match. And then on the intersection between those 2 groups, you have the cultural omnivores, those who do everything and anything. They go to the opera, they go to a soccer match, they don't care. They consume highbrow and lowbrow culture. And then on the bottom, you have this rather weird group of people who don't consume any culture. We then estimate multivariate logistic regressions for each country separately to check how much of the variance is explained by cultural capital, by people's education, and by economic capital, by people's income, over and above, of course, a battery of socioeconomic control variables such as gender, age, having children, etc. And the variance explained, so the R squared, that is actually only reached by cultural capital and economic capital, that is the CCD. And you can see the variance of the CCD on the right side for the European countries. You can see that in the top countries, in Ireland and Bulgaria, cultural consumption on individual level is explained by cultural and economic capital to about 8%, which is quite high. So they have strong cultural class divisions. And on the bottom, you can see countries such as Luxembourg and Denmark, where we can only explain less than 2% of individuals' cultural consumption only by their cultural and economic capital. So here, cultural consumption is not structured very strongly by how much money you have or how educated you are. So here we have weak cultural class divisions. And we assume that in countries where we have strong cultural class divisions, we have a more competitive, a more inegalitarian collective style of relationships. So people will experience higher feelings of inferiority. And we do find this effect. We find a strong positive correlation between cultural class division and inferiority feelings, so that in countries where cultural class divisions are very strong, people do actually experience stronger feelings of inferiority. And this effect holds strong in multivariate analysis, even when we control for income inequality and national wealth. From this very positive finding, we then moved on further into the cultural realm and looked at different cultural value climates. Here we have two sets of value climates. On the left side, you can see rather positive value climates, self-expression values and social trust. And on the right-hand side, you can see rather negative value climates, a strong social norm to work emphasis, and an individual blame for poverty. So how strongly people are blamed for being poor. Here we use data from the European Value Survey study. I can never remember. From the EVS. Self-expression values we construct as they have been constructed by Chris Welsel. They capture how strongly a society puts an emphasis or supports sexual freedom, gender equality, and personal autonomy. So higher values on the self-expression value scale indicate a stronger emphasis on self-expression, on freedom. Excuse me, I didn't do that. Go back. Jan, kannst du mal bitte zurück? Thank you.
Sorry.
And our second measure is social trust, which is a weighted average of the standard trust question you all probably know from the World Value Survey, for example, which measures how much people trust other people on a scale from 1, you can't be too careful, to 10, most people can be trusted. And we construct or measure a weighted average for each country that depicts the overall level of social trust. For these two values, we assume, or value climates, we assume a negative, a dampening effect on the inferiority feelings because they foster a more cooperative and egalitarian collective style of relationship. Then moving on to the right side, we have constructed a measure for social norm to work, which is the average of the answers to statements such as it is humiliating to receive money without having to work for it, or people who don't work turn lazy. So it measures how much of an emphasis people put on people having to work to be worth something. And then last but not least, we have the individual blame for poverty, which is measured as the percentage of people who believe that others who live in need do so because they're lazy and they lack willpower. And for these two, we assume that they foster a more competitive, inegalitarian style of relationships, and thus increase the inferiority feelings. This is not working. It is. As you can see, on the left side, we do find the dampening effect for self-expression values and generalized trust. So in societies that put a stronger emphasis on self-expression and are more trusting, people overall experience less inferiority feelings. And on the right side, you can see that we do find positive effects for the negative value climates. However, only a significant positive effect for the poverty explanations. So in societies that blame the poor for being poor, people overall experience higher levels of inferiority. And again, we do find these effects in multivariate modeling, and they remain stable and significant when we control for economic wealth and income inequality. Taking a look back at where we started from the spirit level, our first idea was to find that equality is better for everyone, and we didn't find that. So we thought we would change the motto to more egalitarian societies are better for everyone. But when we tested this idea and looked at how the value climates impacted different income quintiles, we found that the value climates only impact the higher income quintiles, the inferiority feelings of the poorest income quintile. And in case, as you can see on the left of the self-expression values, the poorest 40% are not impacted at all by the cultural value climate of the society they live in. So more egalitarian countries or societies are indeed not better for everyone, but rather only for those who already benefit from their higher incomes.
So now it's time to wrap up. This is our last slide. So we have started from the question, does inequality hurt? And at the individual level, we can certainly say, yes, of course it does hurt, because we've seen that there is a strong connection between people's rank in the social structure and their feelings of inferiority, in particular the exclusion from the labor market and the low standard of living is harmful to people's well-being. This tells us that modern day societies, also the rich countries, are still very much employment societies and consumer societies, and inclusion into these two spheres is key to prevent individuals from feeling inferior. At the contextual level, it's not that easy, the message we have. So one thing that is clear is that income distribution is not that clearly a driver of inferiority feelings like Wilson and Pickett have assumed, nor is it national affluence. So we always find a tendency in this direction that inequality is bad and that affluence is good. But as Leonie has shown in the multi-level analysis with other control variables, these findings are typically not very robust, but we have seen that more egalitarian societies in a broader sense are good for people's well-being. And in particular, we've seen that countries with a lower cultural class division and a more cooperative value climate, that these are environments in which people feel socially better and have less inferiority feelings. So the policy recommendations would be to heal class divisions and to promote a public discourse which presents each and every group in society as worthy of respect. That's not easy to achieve, but something along the lines politicians should do in order to increase the well-being of the population. And finally, you have noticed that our research focused exclusively on European countries because we have these cross-national data for Europe. But if every one of you is interested to do related research, have fundings to implement questions on status anxieties and inferiority feelings in other countries, for example, in the Arab world, we would be more than happy to cooperate and to contribute to such a project. So thanks a lot for inviting us and to listening to us, and we're looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan and Leonie. That was really interesting presentation. So the floor is open to discussion and questions. And I wanted to remind everybody that there are two ways how you can ask your questions or make comments. So you can raise up your hand, open the microphone and go ahead, or you can type in the chat your question and we will read it and the speakers will try to answer it. So let me open the floor to questions and discussions and ask first the audience. You have any questions, comments, who would like to? So I don't see any questions in the chat yet. So, okay. Bogdan and Malina, they have questions. Please, you can open the camera, the microphone and ask question. Bogdan, please.
Ladies first.
Ah, okay. Malina.
Okay, thank you very much. It was very interesting and fascinating presentation, I would say. I wonder about two things. So, how do you feel, whether you feel inferior or not in a society depends on your place in that society, but I wonder to what extent that depends on how do you feel as being part of a specific nation. And my question is how this is connected with a national pride and national identity, because you might feel inferior because you were born in a specific place or you were born in into a specific ethnic group, or you are a migrant. So there are things that have to do with your place as part of an ethnic group or a national, or being a national. And the second question is, to what extent do you think social norms matter? Because how is the norm in your society regarding by instance, family status? Because in a country where the social norm is living as a couple and you are single, you probably may feel more excluded than in a country where most of the people around you are single as well. And I think the same might be also the case for being on the labor market or being a housewife. So if the social norm is that women are outside the labor market, then you won't feel so much unhappy with your life. Thank you.
Thank you, Malina. I also have one more question to add. So what are the gender differences? So in these feelings of inferiority, are there any gender differences within the countries about that? And also one more question regarding the income, that what also Malina was mentioning, I would go a little bit further. So you said that income distribution is not that much explaining the inferiority feelings, but you And you said that it is more for the cultural inequality or cultural clusters and etc. But you put your cultural class division based on income as well, right? So maybe is there any like interrelation or endogeneity problem there? So thank you. Sorry to interrupt. So what you prefer to collect more questions or to answer these ones?
I think we already have two, and they are quite complex. So I would say let's answer them right now. Okay.
Yes, sure.
Good. Leonie, maybe I start with the national pride issue, and then you can say probably a little bit to the difference between nationals and non-nationals and the gender. Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I would say national pride is from looking at the distribution of the averages. It's an inverse picture we get. So in countries like Bulgaria, for example, we have high feelings of status anxiety, but we do know from other research that national pride is rather high in this country. Cyprus, the same. And on the other hand, on the other side of the ranking, in Germany, very few people really feel proud of being German. Low level of status anxiety. So it seems not have much to do with an overall feeling of a strong national identity, I would say. Leonie, how about the difference between nationals and non-nationals?
I would just add one thing. I think I get a little bit where the national identity idea stems from, and it's similar to which nationality you have and which norms there are. And I think that's one of the problems with Europe, that national pride and really feeling your national identity differs a lot in what it means between different countries. So it can have a positive and very negative connotation. But we do find, which might go a little bit in the same direction, at least for Germany, that inferiority feelings are linked to a lower support of democracy. Maybe that is a little bit into the direction of the question. Regarding nationality, we do find a negative effect. So if you are not a citizen of your country, then you do experience higher levels of inferiority, which seems plausible because you're an outsider to a larger group of people who might look down on you just because maybe you're phenotypical different. I do get the idea of family status having different meanings in different countries. We actually didn't look at that for the countries each by each. I only can say that family status does have a overall positive effect, so it dampens inferiority feelings overall in Europe, but I can see the point, and we should look into that, that in especially the southern countries where family has a stronger importance than in the northern countries, this might even be stronger, and singles, as you said, might experience much less inferiority feelings in the northern countries than in the southern and southeastern countries. And the same would then go for homemakers, housewives and house husbands, probably more of a west-east divide. That is definitely something I cannot say anything about because we really didn't look into it, but we should. And I wrote it down because it seems like a really interesting idea.
For the economic ethos, I would assume that most findings also hold when you look at countries individually. So the income effect, the education effect, also the employment effect, even if there might be a little bit of different framing involved, means not to be employed, I would expect that there is always a negative effect on inferiority feelings. But for this, the family status, it might be a little bit different, right?
And the same goes for the gender differences. There is always a little bit of a tendency that women experience, once we control for all the other things, women experience a little bit more feelings of inferiority, but it was never significant. But I can see that it might be different from country to country. But again, we haven't checked that, so I'm sorry, I cannot say anything more about that. But overall, we did never find a gender difference in none of the years, and with different measurements. And so maybe there just isn't anything in gender that goes beyond family status, employment status, education, income, because then there's nothing much left.
Okay, thank
Finally,
you.
Tatjana, probably to your question with the cultural class division and the income. To be brief on this, you're right that income flows into our cultural class division measure. But probably you can phrase it like this, that what we find is that income per se is not that much important at the contextual level. The income inequality is not that much important for the inferiority feelings per se, but only if it translates into different cultural practices, which are then also have different connotations of value in the public sphere. So this gives you an idea that we shifted the argument a little bit.
Okay, thank you very much for the answers. We have 3 more guests with the questions, and I suggest we collect all questions together because we have only like 5-6 minutes before the end of our timing. And we want to collect all the questions and give you the time to respond. So let's do it quickly and collect all the questions. So first Bogdan, then Francesco, and then Dr. Aygul. So please, Bogdan.
Okay, I will try to be fast, but not speaking very, very fast, because otherwise you'll not understand it. So I have 2 questions, actually. The first one might be a rephrasing of what Malina said. The first question refers to the framework of reference, because your entire conceptual approach is based on the fact that people do compare themselves with a certain framework of reference, and at least at the basic principle, you may compare these frameworks of reference, which should be basically the same for everyone. But how I read what Malina says is that if one lives in a country which has an inferiority complex as a country, as a society, as compared to other societies, it might be already an effect that the people in that country are a little bit lower and do feel inferior to others. Then if you look to the map and to the relation between GDP per capita and your index, you may see it quite clearly. You have Romania and Bulgaria with lower GDP per capita and very, very high inferiority complex. It might be the case of these. And I also see it, we have some research here in Bucharest on inter-European highly skilled immigrants coming to Bucharest, so from countries with higher prestige, which feel clearly superior to the country and change in time. But in the beginning, they really feel superior. And this is one of our findings. It's not published yet, but it will be in a couple of months. The second question refers to the other part of your index, which is the need to compare yourself with others. This is the basic assumption behind your measurement, that people do compare to others. And here it's something that I cannot answer exactly, but maybe you have the answer. Is that a general practice in all societies that people compare to others or not? Because if not, you should control somehow to the attitude, or actually to the habitus to compare to others. That's all.
Thank you, Bogdan. So Francesco, please go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. Fascinating work. I will cherry pick my question. Actually, I have several. Maybe I will email you. So my first question goes a little bit along the line of the last remark by Bogdan. Basically, having ability to access to information about alternative lifestyles is what should drive your mechanism. And I wonder if you can, in any way, try to account for this accessibility across countries. One of these sources, for instance, are online social networks that have incredibly extended our possibilities to learn about how others are living their lives. So to what extent, for instance, the use of online social networks could exacerbate the effects that you're studying here. And the other minor question is, in many aspects, your inferiority feelings resonates with the concept of social comparisons. I wonder what are the differences between the two, or if in the end, what you're talking is really what others have referred to as social comparisons. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesco. Dr. Aygul, please, your question.
So good afternoon or good evening to everyone. First of all, thank you very much. Really, thank you very much for your presentation. And I do have kind of like a small question. So my question is, I noticed that two Baltic states, they're quite close to countries like Denmark, Sweden. So my question is, so what makes these two Baltic countries quite close to Scandinavian countries? Which anyway, I mean, I do understand that like geographically, I mean, three Baltic countries somehow geographically, culturally, maybe sometimes politically, they do identify themselves with Scandinavia as a whole region and with the Scandinavian countries. But anyway, for example, if we look at GDP and other, let's say, indicators, I would say the first point is like all three Baltic countries, they do have the same level actually in terms of GDP, but at the same time, and then let's say some of them, like, I mean, the GDP in that three Baltic countries, it's quite different from another post-socialist countries. So you got my point, right? So, I mean, for me, I don't know, I mean, for me, so my question is that the social, economic background, I mean, those people, I mean, the population in that two Baltic countries, I think it's quite similar to social economic conditions in other post-socialist countries. But somehow these two countries, I mean, in your classification, they are really, really close to Scandinavian countries. So my question is, what makes that two countries close to Scandinavian countries, to population in that country? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else who would like to ask any questions? So it's the right time to show your hand up or like ask the last question, and then we will give the floor to our speakers to answer briefly all the questions they collected. I don't see any other raised up hand or any other questions. So please, Jan, Leonie, you have about like 3 minutes to answer all the questions if you can, please.
Ooh, should I start?
Yes, yes.
Really, really tough questions and very good questions. Thank you very much. First of all, the Baltics, the Nordic countries, we don't know. Probably the best answer we can give is that it kind of reinforces our argument that maybe we have to look also into the cultural realm to have an explanation. Because as you said, in terms of modernization levels and GDP per capita, there's quite a gap between the Scandinavian countries and let's say Estonia and Lithuania, although they really have caught up, but maybe they have something similar in their culture. Estonia also a Protestant culture by tradition, so maybe there's something on this in this cultural makeup of societies which leads to this more healthier style of relationship we have pointed out.
Can I just comment on that? Actually, we had some problems with the Baltic countries because they just play a different role. They have like their own thing going on with inferiority feelings. In one paper, we actually had to kick Estonia out because it switched all the effects completely around for Europe. It's such a huge outlier. And in the last paper where we looked at the social ills, we also saw that the Baltic countries were the countries that drove a lot of the effects, because they, as Jan said, they changed so much during the past 20 years. And I think maybe there's something in that, because they caught up so quickly to Western Europe, to Northern Europe. Maybe that driving feeling that they're moving up changes something, but you are definitely right. There is something odd going on with the Baltic countries, and but we have not found anything to explain it. And as I said, we had to exclude Estonia in one of the papers because of that.
Maybe we put Francesco's and Bogdan's question together. So first of all, it's pretty clear that social comparisons are part of the story, and the idea of the social network use is a brilliant idea, and we have to look into that in order to find out whether this heightens probably this inferiority feelings if people use these social media extensively. On the other hand, we would say that it's not, what we're measuring is not necessarily the same as social comparisons, because this is one important pathway, but there's also, without actively comparing to someone else, simply because you are treated in a social interaction situation by a person in either in a positive or in a negative way, these inferiority feelings can be created. We've seen this in a survey we've done only in Germany, where we've asked people whether they, in what kind of situations they experience status anxieties and inferiority feelings. And we've seen that these are also such interaction situations in which these feelings are created. But we will definitely look into the social comparison issue in the future if data are available. Thanks a lot for this suggestion.
Just one comment to Bogdan mostly. I think we had this discussion quite often that we don't actually know how strongly people want to compare and do compare, and to whom they compare. The problem is we don't have data on with whom someone compares oneself. And that taps into what Jan just said. It's more than comparison, it's more than interaction. We don't even know if people have a real frame of reference, or if they compare themselves with something that isn't even real, like something they saw on TV, or now coming up with the influencer people. So people compare themselves to something that isn't even real, and thus experience inferiority by comparison to something that cannot even be achieved. But there's just no data, there's no way to measure this. But this would be really interesting if one had the option to get more data, like more structured on these questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all the answers. We have to wrap up our session. I would like to thank a lot our speakers for giving us this brilliant, interesting food to think over. So thank you very much. We will be happy if you join us next time for our next episode in May, probably, because due to Ramadan, we will have a break for 1 month. And next time we will have some other fascinating speakers. So thank you again very much for the speakers and for the audience that you're coming to listen to us. It was really great presentation and inspiring research. So, and probably you will have some people to partner and to cooperate with, because you were mentioning that it would be interesting for you to do some research on the Gulf countries and Middle East. So I think me, Dr. Aygul, will be also interested to do something on that kind, and we can talk about later. So thank you so much for everybody, and have a lovely evening and be happy.
Thank you.
Let's
It was a
compare
pleasure.
yourself to the others, huh?
Yeah.
Compare to yourself.
Yes, exactly.
Goodbye. Thank you.